Islam Balokiev, a former spokesman for the Sheikh Mansour Chechen battalion fighting on the side of Ukraine, has stated that the words of Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov about Ukrainian prisoners of war in Gudamess are a lie. Balokiev said that Kadyrov wanted to protect his important facilities from Ukrainian drone strikes by announcing that he was holding prisoners of war in Chechnya. Balokiev made the comment to Kavkaz.realii, quote, "There are no Ukrainian prisoners in Chechnya. They are held in other regions and Kadyrov's men sometimes go there for filming stuff. Only sometimes they can be temporarily brought to Chechnya for a staged video and then immediately taken back." Ramzan Kadyrov used vengeful words yesterday and claimed he was holding Ukrainian POWs after a drone hit a Russian Special Forces university named after Vladimir Putin in the city of Gudamess. It's the first time Chechnya has been hit by a drone. Ukraine has not commented, though Chechen fighters are divided, with some supporting Kadyrov and thereby Russia, and others fighting in specialist regiments for Ukraine. There were no casualties and the fire was put out. In another attack on Russian forces in Chechnya earlier this week, at least one Russian soldier was killed. The attack occurred around noon on the 23rd of October in the Petropavlovskaya village of the Grozny district. Chechen opposition Telegram channels have published video footage allegedly showing the aftermath of the attack, depicting a military vehicle with bullet holes, bloodstains on the road, and a body of the deceased serviceman. Russian law enforcement agencies say they are currently conducting an operation to locate and detain the attackers. Chechnya has a very long and bitter history of resistance against Russian rule that continues to this day. If you are interested in learning about the history of Chechnya, please watch to the end of the video. Otherwise, please like the video now so that I can continue with my Chechnya news updates. So what can we learn of this region in the Caucasus? And what are the possible implications of a conflict between Chechnya and the Kremlin? In this video, we will take a deep dive into the history of the region and current events. The Republic of Chechnya is an autonomous region in Russia. It borders Georgia, Dagestan, Ingushetia, and North Ossetia. Its population is small, only 1.5 million, and almost all are Sunni Muslim. This predominantly mountainous region was, for hundreds of years, heavily defended with fortresses and castles. They still dot the mountains. The noble warriors of these mountains successfully fended off invaders until the 16th century, when Temryuk of Kabardia married his daughter off to the Russian Tsar Ivan the Terrible, and began to encroach on their land. With the death of Temryuk, Russian forces pulled back and stayed away for the next 200 years. With battles raging between the Persians and Russians, followed by the Russians and Turks, the Chechens chose to ally with Turkey and converted to Islam. In 1917, Chechnya, Ingushetia, and Dagestan declared independence and formed the United Mountain Dwellers of the North Caucasus. Only 4 years later, in 1921, the Red Army invaded and occupied their country to become part of the USSR. In the 1930s, due to Stalin's policies, Ukrainians flooded into Chechnya to escape death from famine. 1 in 5 Chechens took in a Ukrainian family. During World War II, 50,000 Chechens and 12,000 Ingush fought with Russia against the Nazis. But at the end of the war, Stalin stabbed them in the back and falsely accused Chechens of being Nazi supporters. Even those who had been officers and received awards were accused. The punishment for this was for the whole population to be forcibly deported to Kazakhstan. Over 60% perished in the transportation in that freezing February. Those who could not go were immediately shot. 496,460 people were forcibly moved. Among them was a newborn baby born on the 15th of February, 1944. 8 days later, this child, the 13th in the family, was deported. His name was Dzhokhar Dudayev, the future leader of independent Chechnya. The accusations of mass conspiracy had, of course, been completely fabricated by the Kremlin to enact genocide. It was disclosed in recent years that the Soviets had plotted to invade Turkey and get rid of Chechens as part of their plan. In 1956, the President Nikita Khrushchev allowed Chechens to return, though many of their homes were now occupied by Russians. In 1991, an independence movement was formed led by former Soviet Major General Dudayev, who had reached high level as an Air Force pilot and had led Russian forces in Afghanistan. He resigned from the Soviet Air Force after refusing to commit human rights abuses in Estonia, and then returned to his homeland. As an opposition leader, his request for independence for Chechnya when the Soviet Union collapsed was refused by Yeltsin despite many Baltic countries becoming independent. On the 6th of September 1991, Dudayev and his men stormed a government meeting, and Dokuzov, the Chechnya leader allied to Soviet Russia, escaped. He rushed back to Kremlin headquarters. He was last heard of as ambassador to Tanzania. Dudayev became the leader of the newly named Chechen Republic of Ingushetia. His popularity was verified by democratic election. But despite his bravery in making Chechnya a republic, he was a poor administrator and devolved his responsibilities to unsuitable cronies while, for example, practicing karate. The parliament lost confidence in his leadership. Dudayev dissolved the parliament and ruled by decree. Chechnya became an almost bandit kingdom where organized crime flourished. In one audacious crime, the Chechen state bank defrauded its Russian counterpart of $700 million using fake proof of fund documents. Russian pipelines running through Chechnya were illegally tapped and at risk of destruction. In 2 years of independence, not one school or hospital was built, and industrial production fell. To Yeltsin, Chechnya was now a threat. What's more, he was becoming increasingly unpopular at home due to the Russian economy collapsing. Then, in December 1994, Yeltsin declared war on Chechnya. In April 1996, the leader Dudayev was targeted and killed by a missile fired from a warplane and guided by a signal from his satellite phone. He was replaced by Zelimkhan Yandabiyev, a poet, an academic, and hardline Muslim. In 1996, having failed to gain territory, Yeltsin declared a ceasefire, and after that, chaos ensued in Chechnya with kidnaps and hostage-taking. Back in Moscow, a newly installed President Vladimir Putin contrived to fix several apartment bombings killing hundreds in Russia. He quickly blamed Chechens, though no shred of evidence proved they were involved. While much evidence was found to implicate the FSB, he used the terrorist excuse to declare another war on Chechnya. His war against Chechnya was brutal and destructive. He destroyed Grozny, its capital. It did, however, make him popular in Russia and embedded him as president. In 2004, Aslan Maskhadov was the Chechen leader but sidelined as a separatist. He was killed by a hand grenade thrown into a bunker. The Kremlin had offered $10 million for information about him. His peace deal to end the war on Chechnya had been rejected by Putin. In 2005, Zelimkhan Yandabiyev was assassinated in Qatar by a booby-trap bomb in his SUV. A golden gun, the calling card of the FSB, was left at the scene. The next separatist president of the republic, Abdul Sadullayev, lasted 1 year before being killed by the FSB in a remote mountain region. But by this time the republic was no longer recognized by the Kremlin, who had installed their own friendly leaders. Back in 2000, during the Second Chechen War, Ahmad Kadyrov, originally a separatist who switched to being a pro-Kremlin Chechen, emerged as an alternative to the hardline separatists. He split from the nationalists and in a secret deal was installed by Vladimir Putin as the de facto leader. On the 9th of May 2004, a bomb planted inside a concrete pillar exploded as Mr. Kadyrov and other Russian and Chechen leaders attended a parade in Grozny, commemorating the 59th anniversary of the victory over Nazi Germany. The stadium had undergone refurbishment completed the day before. Few Chechens would have felt pity for his tearful son Ramzan when Vladimir Putin appeared together with him as television cameras rolled, vowing to avenge his father's death. Every Chechen family had grieved during a decade scarred by 2 wars of Moscow's making. In a coronation by Putin, Ramzan was made president of Chechnya, and vast sums of money were and are still passed to him on the understanding that he is totally loyal to Putin and suppresses dissent. Kadyrov learned quickly how to emulate Putin's vertical of power with prolific use of human rights abuses and assassination. He formed his own private army, made up of former separatists, many of whom still hate Russia but continue supporting him with very generous salaries. Both Putin and Kadyrov have put themselves in a tricky situation of wielding power by force, utilizing outrageously fraudulent elections and fear. The last election produced a result over 96% in favor of Kadyrov. Putin laughed his head off when he heard. There have been numerous power struggles and Kadyrov regularly rids himself of opposition of any kind. The Yamadayev clan was a particular thorn in his side. Ruslan and Sulim Yamadayev were commanders of the Vostok Battalion, one of the few military units in Chechnya, who were not subordinate to Kadyrov, but to the Russian GRU. Both were assassinated. Ruslan was shot dead on Smolenskaya embankment in Moscow in 2008, and in March 2009, Yamadayev was shot multiple times in an underground parking garage in Dubai. Meanwhile, Ahmed Zakayev is the current leader of the Chechen government in exile. He is a former Shakespearean actor and veteran of the First Chechen War. He sought refuge in the UK during the first conflict with Russia. Since then, he has been accused by Russia of 13 criminal acts, but a judge in the British court refused to extradite him to Moscow, fearing he would be tortured. He continues to be an outspoken critic of Putin and Kadyrov. Since the brutal invasion of Ukraine, Zakayev offered his full support to Ukraine and formed the separate Special Purpose Battalion of the Ministry of Defense of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. They have fought on the battlefront from the start to the present. Kadyrov is known to be a buffoon, but has been portrayed as a forceful leader of the Akhmat battalion purported to be fighting on the front with thousands of Chechen reserves. Nothing could be further from the truth. Despite its name, the battalion is made up almost solely of Russians. As a token gesture to Putin, Kadyrov provided a few Chechen troops strictly in non-combative positions. Such soldiers were guarding the border between Ukraine and Kursk when it was invaded by Ukraine, and they immediately surrendered. Most were not in any uniforms but designer clothes. These men had had no military training, and it was said they only knew about war from video games. Putin said nothing to Kadyrov despite the humiliation of Russia being invaded. Kadyrov refuses to send his troops to the front, the reason being that he needs them himself. His population is tiny, and the days of the hardened Chechen warrior are over. Claims of it being only a TikTok army are obvious. In recent weeks, Putin visited Chechnya. He seems to say nothing of the ongoing clear lack of support for his Ukraine campaign. So dependent is Putin on Chechnya remaining stable that he even kissed the Quran. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a group of 20 or 30 men forced their way into the lobby of the Wildberries business center in Moscow, and shots were fired in response. The group included Vladislav Bakalchuk, the husband of the billionaire owner Tatyana Bakalchuk. A shootout ensued and 2 people were killed. Vladislav Bakalchuk had a grudge against individuals who had taken over his wife's company by way of a merger. It was considered a hostile takeover. He had enlisted the help of his friend Kadyrov, who brought along such persons as a heavyweight boxer. Tatyana Bakalchuk announced that she had filed for divorce in July, after which Vladislav Bakalchuk, who currently owns 1% of Wildberries, said that as the couple had never signed a prenuptial agreement, he was legally entitled to half of the company. The company Rus, once owned by Rupert Murdoch, was just 1/20th of the size of Wildberries, and the deal could be deemed unfair. It was, however, proven to have been authorized by Vladimir Putin, who takes no notice of rules, laws, and regulations, and in recent months has begun to snatch businesses away from owners and nationalize them to pay for his war. The merger has still gone ahead. Further to this fiasco, Kadyrov has declared a blood feud against 3 persons connected to the business, the State Duma, and to Dagestan. He claims they have threatened to assassinate him. This is astounding, as there has been little feuding between Chechnya and Dagestan, and these matters would normally be settled by families. Some observers have noticed that the issue of the so-called blood feud is a way of directing focus away from the hostile takeover linked to Putin, who would rather act as a referee without implicating himself. This is a very typical stance of Putin to obfuscate and confuse. Putin and Kadyrov walk a fine line. Despite all the pretense of kissing Korans, there is no real friendship between them. Putin cannot afford a war on another front, and Kadyrov could easily cause Putin problems. Kadyrov may be taking directions from the Kremlin for now, but for how long can this unholy alliance last? Tune in to my channel for further updates. Please like and subscribe.